Alien girl trusted the human with her fractured wing, and his patience healed more than bone. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main characters. Ethan Roberts was no stranger to strange, unexplained things. As a researcher in alien biology, he had encountered his fair share of unexpected beings, but nothing had prepared him for the day he found her. Alira. She was lying unconscious in a field near the crash site of what appeared to be a downed spacecraft. Her wings, delicate and translucent, shimmered faintly in the moonlight, broken and battered. He didn't know much about her race, but he could see she was not from Earth. Her skin glowed with an iridescent sheen, a soft blue hue that seemed almost ethereal. Ethan had heard stories of alien life, but this was different. She wasn't just some passing traveler from space. She was hurt, vulnerable, and in desperate need of help. Without a second thought, Ethan rushed to her side, using his medical training to assess the damage. Her wing was fractured, and it was clear that the injury was severe, possibly life-threatening for someone like her. Despite the urgent situation, he was careful, knowing that every move he made could either help or harm her. But she was unconscious, unable to speak, unable to explain what had happened. As he gently cradled her in his arms and began to stabilize her, Ethan felt a strange connection, a sense of responsibility that went beyond his professional duty. This wasn't just about saving a life, it was about trust. And trust, he knew, was something he had to earn. Alira slowly stirred, her eyes fluttering open, revealing golden irises that reflected the stars above. She looked at him with a mixture of fear and confusion, as if unsure whether he was a friend or a foe. But in her gaze, Ethan saw something else, a quiet plea, a need for safety, and an unspoken understanding that she had no choice but to trust him. Her voice, when it finally came, was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried an intensity that startled him. "You will help me?" she asked, her accent unfamiliar, yet the words were clear. Ethan nodded, his voice calm but reassuring. "I will. You're safe now." The alien girl closed her eyes again, exhaustion overwhelming her, but Ethan could feel the weight of her trust settling on his shoulders. In that moment, he understood that this wasn't just about healing her fractured wing. It was about healing something deeper, something more profound. Over the next few days, as Alira's condition stabilized, the bond between them grew stronger. Ethan learned that Alira was not just any traveler. She was part of a race of beings that had been forced to flee their home planet due to a devastating war. Her journey to Earth had been one of desperation, a last-ditch effort to find sanctuary. And yet, in the midst of her pain and fear, she was beginning to trust him. Her patience and willingness to heal from the inside out began to affect him in ways he hadn't expected. Her fragility became a mirror, reflecting the delicate balance of the human condition, the need for compassion, the power of understanding, and the unspoken bond between two beings from different worlds. Days passed, and Alira's condition slowly improved under Ethan's care. The once fractured wing was now wrapped in medical gauze, supported by a makeshift splint that Ethan had crafted using materials he had on hand. He was amazed at how quickly her body began to heal, though he knew her biology was vastly different from his own. Despite this, there were no signs of infection or complications. Her skin shimmered softly in the dim light of his lab, the faint glow radiating from her body, becoming a comforting presence in the room. As the days turned into a week, Ethan found himself spending more time with Alira. He was still unsure of many things about her race, but he learned that she was intelligent, resourceful, and remarkably resilient. Her ability to communicate through simple gestures and broken sentences had initially caused some awkward moments, but over time, they began to understand each other better. Alira spoke little about her past, but the few words she shared painted a picture of a life filled with sorrow and hardship. Her people had been at war with another alien species for generations, their world torn apart by conflict. Her journey to Earth had been one of escape, and she was unsure of her fate now that she had arrived. Ethan could sense the weight of her past in her eyes, the deep sorrow she tried so hard to hide. He knew she was struggling, but he also saw a flicker of hope in her, something that made her want to heal not just physically, but emotionally as well. As the days went by, Ethan found himself growing more and more protective of her. It wasn't just about healing her injuries anymore. He began to care for her as a person, not just a patient. He found himself talking to her more, sharing stories of his own life, his childhood, and his work. Alira listened quietly, her golden eyes following every word he said. He had come to realize that, despite the vast differences between them, they shared something important, the need for connection. One evening, as they sat together in the small living area of Ethan's home, Alira finally spoke again. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, as though choosing her words carefully. "I'm not from here," she said, her accent still thick, but the meaning clear. Ethan nodded, though he already knew that. "I gathered that," he replied with a small smile. Alira's eyes met his, searching his face for something. "You don't fear me?" she asked, a question that seemed almost too vulnerable to ask. Ethan paused for a moment, considering her words. Fear. It was a word that had come up in their conversations before, a word she had used to describe the reaction of others when they encountered her species. She had been afraid of humans before, unsure of their intentions. But with him, she had found something different, something she hadn't expected. "No," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I don't fear you, Alira. I never have." Alira looked down at her hands, her expression thoughtful. After a long pause, she finally spoke again. I trust you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan felt a warmth in his chest, a feeling he hadn't expected. It was more than just gratitude for saving her life. It was something deeper, something that went beyond the boundaries of species or background. Trust. It was something he had earned through patience, kindness, and understanding. Alira was healing, both physically and emotionally, and he was right there beside her, helping her every step of the way. It was an unexpected bond, one that neither of them had anticipated, but it was growing stronger with each passing day. The days that followed were quieter, more reflective. Ethan had come to realize that caring for Alira wasn't just about physical healing. It was about helping her recover from the trauma of her journey, the uncertainty of her past, and the fear of what her future might hold. As the days stretched into weeks, he found himself learning more from her than he could have ever imagined. Her quiet strength, her resilience in the face of uncertainty, was something he admired deeply. Alira had started to open up more, not through words, but through shared moments. The two would sit together in silence, watching the sunsets as they slowly faded into the darkened sky. Ethan would point out constellations, explaining their names and the stories that went with them, and Alira would listen intently, her golden eyes shining with curiosity. Despite the silence, there was an unspoken understanding between them. They didn't need to speak to know that something had shifted. One evening, as the warmth of the sun was starting to fade, Alira turned to Ethan, her voice soft but clear. "What happens to me now?" she asked, her gaze searching his face. Ethan paused, knowing that this was the question they had both been avoiding. He had been doing everything in his power to help her heal, but he couldn't answer the question of what came next. Earth was not a place for her kind to stay. He had no way of knowing how long it would be before others from her species would find her, or if they ever would. He had no answers for her, only the promise that she would be safe for as long as she was here. "I don't know, Alira," Ethan admitted, his voice steady but filled with regret. "I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this. I'm not going to leave you. You're not alone." Alira looked at him, her face a mixture of emotions: hope, fear, gratitude, and something deeper, something more vulnerable than either of them had acknowledged before. She didn't speak, but her eyes said it all. The silence between them had become a kind of language all its own, one that didn't need words to convey its meaning. The days that followed were filled with small, yet meaningful moments. Ethan continued to care for her, but now, their connection was deeper. It wasn't just about her injury anymore. It was about the bond they had formed, the trust they had built. Every day, they grew closer, and the more they shared, the more they realized how much they needed each other. Alira began to make small gestures that spoke volumes. One evening, as she was resting, she reached out and touched Ethan's hand, the lightest of touches, but it was enough to send a jolt of warmth through him. It was a simple act, but it spoke of something more, of trust, of a connection that went beyond the physical, beyond the fear and uncertainty that had once defined their relationship. They didn't need to say anything. The silence between them was enough to speak volumes. As the days went by, Ethan couldn't help but wonder what the future held. He knew that helping Elira was not without its risks. There was always the possibility that others might come looking for her, that they might not see her the way he did. But despite the uncertainties, one thing was clear: he would do everything in his power to protect her. Elira had taught him more than he ever expected about patience, about healing, and about the power of trust. She had shown him that even in the face of the unknown, there was hope. And as long as she was with him, Ethan knew he would stand by her, no matter what came next. The quiet days they shared began to stretch into something comfortable, something neither Ethan nor Elira had expected. The uncertainty of her future still lingered between them, but there was an undeniable bond growing stronger with each passing day. Ethan continued to care for her, tending to her wounds and making sure she had everything she needed. He had started teaching her more about Earth, explaining the little things she didn't understand, like how humans communicated, how their cultures worked, and the nuances of their world. Elira, in turn, taught him about her own people, their customs, their way of life. She spoke of the stars, of distant worlds, and of a culture that valued strength, but was built on the idea of unity. It was a strange, quiet sort of exchange, but it was enough. As they spent more time together, the questions that hung in the air started to become less about survival and more about what came next. One evening, after a particularly long day of sharing stories and learning from one another, Elira turned to Ethan as they sat together on the porch of his small house. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow across the landscape. "Ethan," Elira began, her voice soft but filled with determination. "I need to ask you something." Ethan turned to her, his curiosity piqued. "What is it?" She hesitated for a moment, her eyes searching his face for the right words. "You said you wouldn't leave me. But what about when they come?" The question hung in the air, thick with unspoken fears. "When they come for me." Ethan knew exactly what she meant. He had wondered about that too. The thought of Elira's people finding her, of what might happen when they did, weighed heavily on his mind. He hadn't told her everything he had been thinking, but he knew it was only a matter of time before others came looking for her. "I'll protect you," he said, his voice steady, though his heart clenched at the thought of what it might mean. "No matter what happens, I'll protect you, Elira." She looked at him for a long moment, her golden eyes searching his face, reading the sincerity in his words. She reached out, her hand brushing his, a simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes. It was an affirmation of their connection, of the trust that had been built between them. Elira nodded slowly, her expression softening. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan smiled, though a small part of him couldn't help but feel the weight of her words. He didn't know what the future held, but he would stand by her no matter what. The days that followed felt different. There was a quiet tension that neither of them spoke about, but both of them felt it. It wasn't just the fear of what might come, it was the realization that their time together was limited. Ethan had done everything he could to give Elira a sense of safety and security, but he knew that sooner or later, her past would catch up with her. He could protect her as long as she was with him, but what would happen when that was no longer enough? Still, they made the most of their time. They walked together under the stars, talked late into the night, and shared quiet moments of understanding that neither had experienced before. Ethan had come to realize that Elira was more than just a patient to him. She was a friend, a companion, and someone he couldn't imagine living without. As much as he knew that the future was uncertain, he couldn't bring himself to think about it too much. For now, they had this. And in this moment, it was enough. Inevitably, the day arrived when the quiet days they had shared together came to an end. Ethan had been working in his small lab when he heard the faint hum of a spacecraft in the distance. He had hoped that the peaceful life they had built would last longer, but deep down, he had always known this moment was coming. Elira had sensed it too. She had grown more restless as the days passed, often staring at the stars as if waiting for something or someone to find her. The trust she had in Ethan was unwavering, but the uncertainty of what would happen next still lingered between them. That evening, as the sun began to set and the air turned cool, Ethan and Alira stood outside, looking out at the horizon. Alira was silent, her wings partially unfurled, though they still bore the scars of the injury she had suffered. Ethan stood beside her, his heart heavy with the knowledge that soon, their time together would be over. Alira turned to him, her golden eyes searching his face. "They're coming, aren't they?" she asked, her voice calm but filled with a sense of inevitability. Ethan nodded slowly, his expression somber. "I think so," he said quietly. "It's only a matter of time." Alira closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to gather her thoughts. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost hesitant. "I never thought I would find this," she said, her gaze drifting to the sky. "I thought I was alone in this universe." Ethan's heart ached at her words. He had never imagined that helping her would lead to this kind of connection. He had expected it to be a temporary situation, but over time, Alira had become more than just a patient to him. She had become someone he cared for deeply, someone he couldn't bear to lose. "You're not alone," Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Not anymore." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Alira turned her gaze back to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. She reached out and gently placed her hand on his arm, a simple touch, but one that conveyed more than words ever could. They stood together in silence for a long moment, the weight of the situation settling over them. The sound of the spacecraft grew louder, and Ethan felt his stomach tighten. He knew that Alira's people were coming, and that soon, she would have to leave. But he couldn't bring himself to say goodbye, not yet. "Whatever happens," Ethan said finally, his voice almost a whisper, "I'll always remember this time. The time we had together. I won't forget you." Alira nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I won't forget you either, Ethan," she said softly. The spacecraft was almost upon them now, and Alira's expression shifted. There was a sense of resolution in her eyes, but also a hint of sadness. She knew that she had to go, but the thought of leaving behind the one person who had cared for her, the one person who had shown her kindness when she had none, was a pain she could hardly bear. But she also knew that this was the only way forward. With a final look at Ethan, she stepped back, her wings unfolding fully as she prepared to take flight. "Goodbye, Ethan," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Ethan watched her, his heart heavy with the realization that this was the end. He wanted to reach out, to hold her, to stop her from leaving, but he knew he couldn't. She had to go. "Goodbye, Alira," he said quietly. "I'll always remember you." And with that, Alira took flight, disappearing into the night sky, leaving Ethan standing alone, his heart full of both love and loss. I had never realized how empty the world could feel until Alira was gone. The days that followed her departure passed slowly, each one heavier than the last. Ethan returned to his routine, but something was missing. He couldn't shake the feeling of loss, a hollow ache in his chest that no amount of work or distraction could fill. He spent countless nights staring up at the stars, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, even though he knew it was impossible. The sky was vast, and she was somewhere far beyond his reach. Yet, somehow, he couldn't let go of the thought that their connection, however brief it had been, was something real. Days turned into weeks, and life continued. But there was an emptiness in Ethan that wouldn't fade. He had kept his promise to Alira. He had protected her. But now that she was gone, he couldn't help but wonder what had become of her, whether she was safe, or if she was still out there, floating among the stars. His mind wandered to the stories she had told him, of her people and the life she had left behind. He remembered the pain in her voice when she spoke of her war-torn world, the way her eyes would drift off as she recalled the destruction her people had faced. Alira had never been one to show weakness, but Ethan had seen it. The burden of everything she had lost, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find a place to belong again. He wondered if she had found that place. One evening, as Ethan sat outside, the night air cool against his skin, he caught a glimpse of something in the sky. A light, faint and distant, but unmistakable. His heart skipped a beat as he watched the streak of light move across the sky, fading into the horizon. Was it her? Was it Alira? Or was he simply imagining things? He didn't know, but in that moment, he felt something stir inside him, a sense of hope that he had almost forgotten. Maybe it wasn't over. Maybe, somehow, their story wasn't finished. He had never believed in fate, but Alira had changed something in him. She had made him believe that, against all odds, connections like theirs could survive, even if they seemed impossible. Ethan stood up and walked to the edge of his porch, staring into the vastness of the night. He couldn't change the past, and he couldn't undo what had happened. But as the stars sparkled above him, he found himself filled with a quiet resolve. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that he couldn't forget her. And if he ever saw her again, if the universe had a way of bringing them back together, he would be ready. For now, he could only wait, and hope that somehow, the stars would guide her back to him. The days stretched on, and the sense of longing Ethan had felt since Alira's departure never quite dissipated. It had been months, and though life had returned to its usual rhythm, something inside him had changed. The nights were the hardest. He would still gaze up at the stars, his thoughts drifting to her. He never told anyone about his quiet hope, his belief that maybe, just maybe, she might return. Deep down, he knew it was improbable, yet there was a part of him that couldn't let go. He had cared for her, not just as a patient, but as a friend, and that bond remained. One evening, while out for a walk, Ethan heard a faint sound in the distance, a hum, subtle at first, like a whisper through the trees. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be? He hurried toward the sound, his steps quickening as he moved through the familiar terrain that had once been so peaceful. The sound grew louder, no longer a whisper but a low, steady hum, like something approaching. And then he saw it, a shape against the night sky, moving with purpose. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. It was not just a ship, it was her, Alira's spacecraft. His heart raced as it slowly descended toward the Earth, its lights flickering against the dark. He didn't know what to expect, or what had brought her back, but there was no mistaking it. The spacecraft landed softly on the open field before him, its engines humming down to a quiet stop. For a moment, everything was still. Ethan stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to move or speak, as he waited for the hatch to open. His mind raced with questions. Why had she come back? Had she been searching for him? Was it really her, or had something brought her here by chance? The hatch slowly opened, and there she was, stepping down from the craft, her wings glowing softly in the dim light of the night. Alira. Ethan didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but all he could do was stand therein. Oh, she looked the same, yet somehow different. Her eyes, though tired, were filled with a sense of determination that hadn't been there before. She walked toward him, her steps steady and sure. Ethan, she said softly, her voice calm but filled with an emotion that echoed in his chest. She stopped just in front of him, her gaze meeting his. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. They had already said everything they needed to, in the silence they had shared, in the bond they had built over the days, weeks, and months. Alira reached out, her hand trembling slightly as it rested on his arm. I couldn't stay away, she whispered, her voice carrying a weight of truth. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had spent so many nights wondering if she would ever come back, if he would ever see her again, and now here she was. I'm glad you came back, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. Alira smiled softly, her wings folding gently behind her. I had to, she replied simply. And just like that, in the quiet of the night, they were reunited, their hearts beating in sync once more. Ethan couldn't explain it, but he knew that whatever the future held, he wouldn't let her go again. In the days that followed Alira's return, a quiet sense of peace settled over Ethan's life. Her presence brought a calm he hadn't known in months. They spent their time talking, relearning each other's stories, and discovering what had changed in the time they had spent apart. Alira, though still carrying the weight of her past, seemed lighter now. The uncertainty that had plagued her before was replaced by a quiet determination. She no longer spoke of leaving, and neither did Ethan. It felt as though their worlds had finally aligned, their paths intertwined in a way neither of them had expected. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they stood side by side, watching the sky. It was one of those perfect moments, where the world felt still and everything seemed right. I've been thinking, Alira said softly, breaking the silence between them. I've been given another chance, haven't I? Ethan turned to her, his gaze soft. You have. And so have I. He smiled, the weight of the past few months lifting off his shoulders as he realized how much she meant to him. I thought I was alone, but now I know I wasn't. Not really. Alira's golden eyes met his, filled with an emotion he couldn't quite name. I'm not sure where I belong, Ethan. But being here with you, it feels like home. The words touched him deeply, more than he could express. He reached out, gently taking her hand in his, their fingers entwining. It was simple, but it was everything. They stood there for a moment, just holding each other's gaze, knowing that whatever the future held, they had each other. In the quiet of the night, under the stars that had once seemed so far away, they realized that they had found something in each other, something more important than healing wounds or fixing broken wings. They had found a connection that transcended distance, time, and even species. A bond forged not in the darkness of the past, but in the light of trust and understanding. We don't know what comes next, Ethan said, his voice steady but full of warmth. But whatever it is, we'll face it together. Alira nodded, her wings folding softly against her back as she leaned into him. Together, she echoed. And in that moment, they both knew that this was just the beginning. The beginning of a new chapter, one filled with uncertainty, yes, but also filled with hope. Hope that they could build something strong enough to withstand anything that came their way. As the stars above twinkled softly, Ethan and Alira stood together, ready to face whatever the future had in store. With each other, they knew they could endure anything. Months passed, and though the world outside seemed unchanged, Ethan and Alira had both grown. They had created a life together, one built on trust, understanding, and the quiet, unspoken bond that had formed between them. Ethan had long stopped looking up at the stars with longing. Instead, he would turn to Alira, her golden eyes always steady and filled with warmth. He no longer needed to wonder if she would leave. She had chosen to stay, and in doing so, she had given him something he never expected, a sense of belonging, a sense of home. The world they built together was not perfect, but it was theirs. It was filled with moments of shared laughter, quiet nights under the stars, and the comfort of knowing that whatever came their way, they would face it together. Alira, once burdened by the pain of her past, now walked with a quiet grace, her wings no longer weighed down by the scars of her past injury. She had found peace in the life she and Ethan shared. The two of them worked side by side, often in the small workshop Ethan had set up in his backyard, repairing things, building things, and talking about everything and nothing. Over time, Alira had started to teach Ethan more about her people, their history, and their culture. She spoke of the beauty of the stars, of the way her people saw the universe not as something to conquer, but as something to live in harmony with. They shared dreams, hopes, and fears, things they had both kept hidden for so long. But through it all, they had each other. One evening, as they sat on the porch together, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Alira turned to Ethan, her expression soft, yet serious. I've been thinking, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan turned to her, curious. What about? Alira hesitated for a moment, her gaze drifting to the horizon before returning to him. About what comes next. She paused. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I want to be here, with you, for as long as we can. Ethan smiled, his heart swelling at her words. He had spent so much time wondering if their connection was enough to overcome the differences between them. But now, looking at her, he realized that the only thing that truly mattered was the life they were building together. I want that too, he said, his voice steady. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with understanding. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, they were both at peace with it. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow on the two of them as they sat there, side by side, watching the world unfold around them. In that moment, they knew that whatever happened next, they would face it together. No matter where the stars took them, they would always have each other. And that, in the end, was enough.